Hello and welcome to today's virtual Hinckley Forum. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley Forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. We would like to thank our streaming sponsor, AARP Utah, for making our virtual forums this fall possible. We would also like to thank our media sponsor, KCPW, for recording and rebroadcasting forums as part of the Hinckley Radio Hour. Today's forum is Shaping Public Opinion, How to Change Billions of People's Opinions and Not Get Caught. We are joined by guest speaker James Rich. Rich is a master in persuasion, a skill increasingly necessary for those involved in politics, advocacy, marketing, communications, and more. James Rich is Vice President of Insights at Y2 Analytics. He focuses on impactful research that leads directly to business results. He has driven growth working for and with Fortune 50 companies like Facebook, Walmart, PepsiCo, and key policy influencers like the Nuclear Energy Institute and National Home Builders Association. James is a graduate of Brigham Young University and has an MBA from the Sam Walton School of Business at the University of Arkansas. He also served as an adjunct professor at BYU teaching survey methodology in advertising. If you have questions for our speaker, please enter them into the YouTube chat. And with that, I'll turn the time over to James.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Really glad to be here. My presentation style is pretty informal, so I would love to get questions for you, and please feel free to interrupt with questions. So I want to make this as useful to you as possible and as interesting as possible. One note before I kick off, I am not speaking in behalf of any of the organizations that I've worked before. So it's important to know I've had a great opportunity of working for a lot of good companies, Walmart, Facebook, some others to name a few. So what I'm expressing is my own thoughts rather than any policies or thoughts that they have. So to start off, I'm going to talk today a bunch about persuasion and how persuasion can be done on a large scale and how to be effective at persuasion. The starting point I have is, to give you a little bit about me, working at Walmart, working at Facebook, my jobs were helping understand through research where consumers and key stakeholders were, government stakeholders, policy stakeholders, key customers, and then understanding how to shift their opinions and behaviors into what was most beneficial to the company. So I've been doing it for a lot of years. I've had fun doing it. And continue to do it at where I'm at right now, which is Y2 Analytics, which is a polling and research firm where we continue to help. So starting off, persuasion. The beginning perspective to be effective is that when you are trying to persuade, whether it's another person or whether it's an audience or a stakeholder group, you need to communicate in a way that the other person understands what you intend. So to clarify on that, most of the time when we are interpersonal, person-to-person communication, we're talking in ways that we understand. We use words and phrases in a way that we're articulating this idea in our own heads. But if you want to persuade somebody else, you have to understand how they're receiving you, and you have to understand what feelings you are evoking within them. So let me give you a good example. So about, I guess it's 2-3 years ago now, if you remember United Airlines, when they pulled one of their customers forcibly off of one of their planes, and basically he looked like he'd been beat all to heck. Well, when the CEO put out a statement, he did not put that statement out in a way that people understood. He put it out in a way that an airline CEO, other airline CEOs totally understand what he meant. When he said, we support the actions of our employees. How that was received by most people was, United is fine beating the crap out of people. That's not what he intended. What he was intending was to communicate that they are supportive of their employees, that they are wanting their employees to know that they as a company stand with them. But because they were so, because the CEO was so out of line and so perceived as being out of line with his audience, they lost millions of dollars. They were hammered in the press. They did not accomplish what they were trying to accomplish. When we're looking about today and communication today, I think what you see is that more people are trying to feel good about how they communicate than be effective. So you look at the talking heads on the news, you look at plenty of internet videos of people just shouting at each other. No one was ever convinced to change their opinion by being called an idiot. Simply doesn't happen. And so while it may feel good to call somebody an idiot, you will have fundamentally failed in your objective. So to be effective, you got to know what you want to, what behavior, what outcome you want to get. It might be a feeling, it might be a behavior, it might be an attitude change. But you need to determine what outcome makes the most sense for you, and then be good at trying to be creative in trying to solve it. So great example would be, how would you get a Montana farmer, a Montana rancher, to want an electric vehicle? If you are trying to convince them to get an electric vehicle because it's good for the birds, or it's it's the right thing to do for the country, they're not going to care. They're not going to do it. But if you wanted, what they do care about is independence. So if your real outcome was making them feel good about climate change, you're never going to do it. But if your objective is to get them to actually drive an electric vehicle, you can talk to them about independence. You can talk to them about how, in combination with self-designed water power, or with solar power, that they could achieve independence from the grid. You will convince more people, more Montana farmers, to buy electric trucks than if you ever talked about what the standard line is. So it's important to know your audience, to see what's important to them. And once you know that you are, you have an outcome in mind, you have to adjust your behaviors to get them engaged with your idea. Right? Typically what you're seeing now, and you're seeing a lot of now in communication styles by individuals, is to beat up on people, to intimidate people, to make them fear not falling in line. And the reality is it may alter behavior for a moment, but it is not long lasting. It will solidify resentment, and it will solidify the other person actively, because human beings are vindictive often. It will solidify the other people, the person who has been beat up on, their idea will be permanently solidified. So again, if you want to be effective, you're going to have to look at the methods and means through which you're communicating. So some examples, right? McDonald's has changed more behavior than Greenpeace ever has. McDonald's doesn't care about your feelings, but they just want you to buy a Big Mac. And they'll talk about that in multiple ways. Greenpeace wants you to feel a certain way. They want you to act in a certain way for specific reasons. And rather than be effective, they want to be, they want people to feel things and do them for the same reasons they want to. And that's often why they have not been as impactful as they could be in a lot of the work they've done. McDonald's, however, you feel good when you have a burger or whatever. You may not think well of the company, but they get millions and millions of people every day to change their behaviors based on their advertising. Let's do, all right, so how do we do this? If the first point in any exchange, whether it's interpersonal, person to person, or whether or not you're a big company, it starts with if you're trying to convince somebody else, you have to signal to the other person that you want good things and good outcomes for the person you're talking to, right? You're trying to create alignment between them. If it's politics, we're on the same team. Either you're on the Republican team and we're all Republicans together, or you're Democrats and we're all Democrats together. For companies, often they're saying we're transcending the politics of today, and we can all agree that the children are our future, or we can all agree that education is important for people to be successful, right? In order for someone to be able to receive, so the person you're talking to, for them to receive and be open to changing their perspective, they have to have a certain amount of trust. They have to feel a certain amount of goodwill, or they have to feel in some way that engaging in this conversation will lead to a good outcome for them. And if you've not created that place of safety, it's never going to work, right? Trump being a speaker to try to convince people in the DNC to do something is never going to work. There's no trust there. There is no willingness to listen. There's no you've immediately turned people off. So who your speaker is, how they're approaching you, all of these things are important to lay a groundwork of openness and positive intention. Okay. Apple is a really great example of making you feel like they care about you, right? When Steve Jobs was alive, when he spoke, you felt that he was bringing you personally towards a better place. The reality is Apple doesn't care about you as an individual. They just want to sell dongles. But they need to make you feel like you care, and so that you're going to be open to what they're going to ask you to do. So if you're ever in a position where you're trying to convince somebody else, you've got to make them feel good. Even if you hate their guts, if you want them to change, You have to make them feel that you are engaged with and concerned about their outcome in the situation. Okay. After you've built trust and intent, you need to acknowledge their perspective. Okay. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but you have to acknowledge their point of view. And I'll get some examples, some real life examples of this in a minute. I'm just kind of setting the groundwork for it. If there is an unhappy customer, you have to acknowledge their feelings. Because you need to get their head nodding, you have to start from a same place, even if that place is untrue. So a lot of examples of this at Walmart. So this is some poor examples of communication. I was working with one of their people in the meat department. He refused, this executive in communication refused to acknowledge that people believed his meat wasn't great, right? In reality, he had purchased really high quality stuff. The outcome that was happening is there was in-store problems with employees not taking care of it, and so that's why people shop around meat. What we said, in order to change people's opinions, you have to acknowledge the phrase would be, we have not always been perfect in our execution. We are trying to make substantive changes that are going to lead to better outcomes for you. So we're altering our process to deliver you better outcomes. And we want you to go in and have a look one more time. If he had done those steps, he would have been successful. But his refusal to acknowledge, he just wanted to say, go look one more time. By only saying go look one more time and not acknowledging that they had done a poor job in the past, the studies that we showed, that we looked at showed no one knew, went and looked. He did not get anybody to change their mind or change their behavior because he had not acknowledged their truth, their reality, their belief. When it comes to the real world, we may think people believe false things, and it's true. The thing that you need to remember is every single person in the world believes things that are untrue and go about their lives living perfectly normal and exciting lives and happy lives, fully believing things are not true. That could be factual inaccuracies that Napoleon was a midget or was super duper short. It's not true. But people live perfectly good lives. They go vote. They go, they send their kids to school, believing and acting upon things that are untrue. You have to acknowledge the fact that people, their world is shaped by their own perspective and their own beliefs on what's true or not. Your failure to do that, you just saying you're wrong, will never get you anywhere in trying to convince or change behavior. So that's why research is incredibly important, to be able to know and acknowledge where people start. You have to meet them where they're at. If you're demanding that they meet you where you're at, it's never worked. You're trying to get them to change. In order to get them to change, you have to start where they are. So that opening statement is incredibly important. I'll give you a really big example of that. So first company I was at was all about language strategy. And we had been hired by a major beverage organization because in 2009, there was a really big push to take soda out of school. Parents were for it, schools were for it, everyone was for it. The people who weren't for it were the beverage company. They were going to lose a lot of money. This is not necessarily one I'm super proud of, but it's a really good example of how you actually change perspectives. So the beverage company hired our organization to figure out how we could slow this down or stop the movement. When we did that, we did a whole bunch of groups where we talked to parents, and we finally hit on a messaging tack. And this entire campaign was killed by essentially a paragraph of messaging. So it ended up being, we at this beverage company understand that nobody can be a better parent to your children than you. The government is trying to tell you how to be a parent. We at this beverage company understand that soda is a treat for your child. And you have as a parent, have the right to choose whether to give that treat or not, and in what way that should be done. You should vote against this idea, not because of whatever, but because they're taking your right as a parent to be able to choose how you want to take care of your child. Sounds crazy, but we hit on something that was in their interest. We hit on something that we built some trust with, and the trust was actually built in acknowledging where the perception of parents are with soda. We acknowledged what that was. They recognized that it was the same belief they had. And then the value that was most important to them was not that hitting on that they're a better parent for their child than the government. By aligning to that, it was not a very far jump to get them to believe that taking this action, voting against this idea, was in their best interest. And so because that was a small leap from that big acknowledgement center, it was able to be really effective. It killed it in its tracks, and kids are still getting diabetes today because of it. A question popped up. What do you think of the ethical boundary line between something like public health and corporate profit? Is that a concern for you? Yes, which is why I left the company that did that. The thing is all of these things I'm talking about can be used for good or bad. I worked for some people in different points that had absolutely no ethical qualms. They went where the money was. And it's up to you as an individual to determine what is the good that you're working for, whether that's for your own profit, or whether that is for good. I had been part of a couple of projects like that, and I just said I can't. You might be able to use the same logic a lawyer does, which is everybody needs a good defense. In this case, my choice was to say, I don't need to do that anymore. And I can use it for good ends. I can be working for companies who are actually having good intent, and are trying to benefit other people. And I can use my experience to help them. Ultimately, I'm talking about this stuff too, is hopefully you are learning some of those ethical standards in school, but you're thinking through, that kind of step 2, right? Is when you're really looking at the benefit of the other person, the actions you are taking, if you are really doing something in their benefit, you can move them towards a good goal and a good end. And if it's not in their benefit, most of the time you can't really find a way to do it. So really good question. If other questions come up, please don't hesitate to tap them in. Okay. Next step is, just in terms of acknowledge, it's that value acknowledgement is the heart of getting somebody towards your perspective. Good example of that, and that can be done by the speaker, that can be done by the statement you're making. I've got a couple of climate change points on this one, and it's more just because I did some recent projects, right? If you were on the left and you wanted to get people actually changing behaviors in ways that would be beneficial to the climate, right? Not having a debate about climate change in any way, but if you're trying to get more people to be favorable towards actions that have directly positive consequences to the environment around them. A lot of current climate change rhetoric isn't effective because it's this big debate over why we're doing stuff and if stuff exists, right? You're attacking something that isn't leading to a positive outcome, right? If you're trying to actually make changes, one of the best ways to do it, and I've done a bunch of research on this, is talking about being a good steward for the environment. The right is in favor of being a good steward of the environment. If you couch issues in this idea of being a good steward, so we are, funding the planting of trees in this area, you can get favorability on both sides of the aisle towards that idea. But you have to couch it in a different way. You have to frame it in a way that aligns to the value of the person that you're trying to get towards your idea. If John Wayne was alive, getting him to talk about it, or Teddy Roosevelt, right? Like using people in your communication that are aligned to the values of the person you're trying to convince is incredibly useful, right? If you talked about Teddy Roosevelt and using his quotes and aligning your action or your policy towards that vision is it's accomplishable to move people through that pathway versus just saying you're wrong, you should believe this in this way, and if you don't believe it in this way, you're a dummy head or whatever, right? It's not going to get you what you want. It's not going to get the outcome that you're looking for. So it's important to understand the audience that you're trying to convince and help them understand it in the way that you're intending and help them move incrementally from where they are to the outcome that you're looking to attain. Okay. The final step in the convincing process, right, is you're starting with trust, then you're acknowledging where they are, acknowledging the values and that what you're going to talk about is aligned to their values. It's the inform. It's the either new information that you're applying to them. It's the request that you're asking of them. And it's the action, right? So with the soda piece, the action was vote against this idea, or it was call your congressman to say no when this idea comes up. For McDonald's, it's come in and buy a Big Mac or tasty beverage. If it's for come in and buy a shirt from my store, right? Whatever it is, the point is that the bigger the leap that request is, the more you have to have built acknowledgement, and the more you have to have built trust and aligned to values. An example of a really big leap is current administration wanting to pull out troops from countries in the Middle East, right? Typically, if we just look at the surface, not talking about the why and wherefore, just talking about on the surface, that value set is switched, right? I think it was a year or two ago, Trump had talked about pulling troops out. The speakers and people on the left were saying, no, we should keep them in. And then people on the right were defending, no, we should pull those out. Cognitively, each side was arguing something that was antithetical to their core beliefs. But because of the speaker involved, and because of of how it was approached, the administration got their team to be in favor of something that was not typically aligned or perceived to be aligned with their normal values. Similarly, because it was the administration, the opposite team advocated against something that is generally in their value system. So you can see by that interaction between building trust and aligned values, and then what is the ask? And when you had really aligned values and really aligned, we're all on the same team here, you got people to do things that are opposite to what they would normally do. But if you're a company, often you're going to have a really hard time moving people huge amounts, right? You haven't built that up enough. You haven't built enough trust. You haven't built enough value recognition to be able to move people that far. And there still are ways to do that. So one of the stories I'll share, okay, so now I'm going to give you some examples of some real worlds of things doing that. So Walmart, 90% of Americans shop at a Walmart. They had, at the beginning of this engagement, so this is years ago, so these numbers probably won't be crazy for anybody to share. 25% of all dry grocery in the United States is sold in a Walmart at the time. So that means 1 out of 4 of every box of Honey Nut Cheerios sold in the United States was sold in a Walmart. Well, their fresh department, so produce, only 16% of the bananas in the U.S. Had been sold through Walmart, and they wanted to improve that. What we looked at is that there was there's 2 kinds of problems companies have. They have PR problems and real problems. This ended up being a real problem. They were not buying good stuff. They did not have the right structures in place. They also in store didn't have a lot of knowledgeable people helping oversee the produce and make sure that the bad stuff was getting taken out and the good stuff was brought in. Because there is that many people, I had to help them change the opinion of 330 million people. We had to make incremental changes in about 330 million people and shift the opinion. In order to do that, when you actually have a product problem, a PR problem is different. A PR problem is a much lower level of issue. But this product problem, they spent north of $10 million on buying better stuff, changing their supply lines, and bringing better products into the store. So the example of this is strawberries. Because they didn't understand strawberries, they'd go where it would rain heavily. And strawberries were really cheap where it rained heavily because strawberries are like mini water balloons. The problem was you transfer a little mini water balloon and it goes bad and it molds faster and bad things happen with it. Anyways, they ended up fixing some of these problems, and but nobody knew about it. In order to get the behavioral change of additional shoppers, they had to first fix the problem. Second, make it look in store as though the problem had shifted. So they had bought new stuff, nobody noticed in store. So then they had to change the layout in every single one of their stores so that it looked fresher, so that people could see something was different. And then they spent $50 million communicating that things had changed. Because they met people where they were, they said, hey, we recognize we haven't done well. So the messaging was this: we recognize we haven't always been awesome in the past. We've made some changes that you can see. Please go in and try us again, because the prices are in line with what you'd want to have with produce. We hit on the value that was important to them was price and quality. We made it possible for them to see that those changes existed. And then we informed them. They got, it netted in a 1.5% increase, so which is billions of dollars. But it got people to come in and change their mind. And we changed the minds of, we got 30% of America to think more positively about Walmart by doing that. Question came in. How can the transition from US support of a communicator with the finesse of Obama to the more abrasive style of Donald Trump be explained from the standpoint of effective communication and politics? Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the things that we're seeing at the top is reflective of our beliefs towards each other. And what I'm saying is the team is becoming more and more important because neither side is doing a good job of reaching out, right? I think if you go back to Clinton, there was more ability to, he was a positive communicator, right? And you got a lot of people in the middle to be open to certain ideas. Trump, I think is a symptom of our inability as a country. This is just my take. I could be wrong. It's our inability to think about the good of other people, right? His embrace, whatever you feel about the style, his style is to talk about, our team thinks this is the best idea. We're going to do this thing, our team wise. Everybody on the team get behind it. So whatever you think about the policy, it's this, he's just speaking through the idea that it's all about our team. There are people on the left who are saying some of the same things. Obama was very smooth, but even he wasn't able to accomplish as much because the underlying feeling, for good or bad, on the right is that they still couldn't trust him as much. However, he did really good job internationally. Like, whatever you think about him, the international people thought better about the United States because of his communication style. When it comes, the net is, it kind of comes down to this. If you are trying to be impactful, right, and you're trying to get the most outreach possible, you have to work on building trust and aligning values. And so that's, for good or bad, doesn't matter what the policy are, Trump doesn't engender a huge, a coming together. And so it has to be more of a fight to be able to get accomplished what he wants to accomplish. So again, it comes back to, like, what do we want to accomplish? Do we want to kind of bring things more together, or do we want to just like force things through for our team? And if you're getting into corporate stuff, or even, you know, thinking about being effective in politics, you want to get as wide a base as possible to be in favor in order to achieve your objective. Another good question. After building trust, what suggestions do you have for educating someone without making them feel like you were talking down to them? Ooh, that's a good question. It's engaging with them honestly at their level. A lot of that actually can be built by, if you're interpersonal, it can be done by talking and engaging back and forth, right? Asking them questions, and then like positive body language and nodding and going, okay, that's interesting. You don't have to agree with them, but you can acknowledge their point of view is valuable to them, right? So it's the pivot. And I think where you're talking about talking down to them, where people feel talked down to, is when you are enforcing facts onto them and saying, no, it's talking down to them is always the feeling of you don't know what you're talking about. But when you do know what they're talking about, because you've talked to them and engaged with them, or for corporations or for political parties, you're doing research, you're engaging with them. It's those statements of, we all can believe here. The more broad a statement you're making of agreement, the more people can buy into what you're saying, and the more it doesn't feel that you're talking down to them, right? You're able, to say things like, we all want kids in the United States to be fed, right? Nobody's going to disagree with that point, but they may disagree philosophically about the way we do that. But if you can find that incremental point of saying, maybe they don't agree to the way we're doing it, or the motivation behind it, but can you agree to this incremental change being a good that is also a good for you? So the talking down happens when you're like, well, your fact is wrong. To tell someone their fact is wrong is, there's been a lot of studies done. To tell someone they're wrong, or to tell them they're an idiot, is the surest way to make them actually continue to believe in that thing. What you're doing is getting an incremental piece of information that opens them up to a different direction, right? I'm trying to think. McClintock is a great example of, there's a great quote by John Wayne in there about, being able to take care of, he wants to donate his land to a national park. And because, there's too many people killing beavers and it went too far, right? Like, if you're in an environmental conversation with somebody on the right and you want to get into a shared space, you got to learn to talk about it in the way they understand it. And you can make incremental improvements, but if you don't have to agree to what they say, but you can acknowledge. And if you haven't acknowledged their perspective or acknowledged that they're okay to have a perspective, there's no way that they're going to be willing to change, because then it's just an argument. It's not discourse. It's not moving forward. Another question was discourse on social media. So what we've seen, what I saw in Facebook. So here's an interesting. I actually did a bunch of research into filter bubbles and things like that. A lot of the online discourse is much more about feeling good than changing anything. It's when people are putting their anonymous comment or an anonymous comment just inside, they're signaling to the world their beliefs and not actually wanting or encouraging change. What's interesting about social media is we've done the research and it shows social media actually exposes, and there was internal stuff and there was external stuff. There was a lot of academic work done to validate this, is that people who are on social media are actually exposed to more points of view than people who are not on social media. And the thing people forget is that as individuals, we spend most of our lives cultivating our opinion. We choose who to hang out with. We choose who we're going to listen to. We choose what news we're going to read. The fact that social media is exposing us to people we would normally never be exposed to. So your friend's cousin makes a comment and you see that. You normally would never have talked to cousin Ted or cousin Angeline. You never would have seen that except on social media. In some ways, social media has caused us to be exposed to things we've never been exposed to before. And it's causing us to respond in lots of different ways, some positive, some negative. I will say something that's the academic research that was done came out with the idea that actually, and this was measurable, and this is provocative, but it was actually people on the left were more likely to shut down conversation of people on the right. They were more likely to remove somebody that they disagreed with. And that is, it's a hard question to think through on social media, right? Because in like Twitter and the anonymous areas were, make it very easy for people to just spout whatever they want, right? So it's partially to blame, but it's also partly just an indicator of how people have changed the behavior. It's a reflection of the times. It's not necessarily a cause. It's part of it. But the reality is there is more push to make it socially acceptable to be awful to other people. And the reality is whether it's in media or TV shows or movies or our own experiences, we are seeing it being normalized and celebrated, even though in a lot of the research we've done, left and right, people are sick of it. They don't like it, but it's selling stuff, right? It's selling, reality shows where people are horrible to each other are selling advertising. So people are watching it, and that is influencing their behavior in the real world. And the way to change that, right? One of the questions on here is how do we kind of change that? Is in some ways it's got to be reflective of your own behavior with other people, right? It's in my case, I do thousands of focus groups where I talk to people of every background and every experience and every philosophy and get to understand and know what they mean. I'm kind of lucky in that way, is that I get to understand and see lots of other people. I think one of the questions that everybody should ask themselves are, have they had a really positive conversation that was meant to investigate and not preach to somebody of a completely different political philosophy? And am I willing to allow somebody else to make incremental progress? And does that incremental progress of an individual count as much to me as demanding conformity to my perspective? And so I think what we're seeing from both extremes, left and right, are both demanding conformity. They're demanding not only that you act in the way that we demand, but you must believe it in the same way as well, so that you have to be righteous as well as obedient. And I think personally, my take is that the demand for righteousness is wrong, right? The demand for conformity of belief and attitude is it's not how human beings work. And so and it's not caring about the other person, it's just demanding people do what you say, right? Anyways, I'll get off that soapbox. Feel free to put in some other questions. I'm going to share kind of one or two other stories that hopefully are useful. I'm going to talk about, so Facebook and the Russian ad scandal is, some of the younger people won't necessarily remember that from about 2 or 3 years ago. But, well, it was during all the Trump stuff. And what was interesting from the Facebook side, so what people don't understand about Facebook is that there's 2 billion people who use it. And Mark has really positive intentions, but with 2 billion people engaging with any platform, the execution of any one idea doesn't always come through in the way they think. Facebook also got to 1 billion people, 1 billion users without any ads. And it came through at a time when, if you guys think back, a lot of the initial Facebook was just, hey, let me share this cool thing. And if other people like it, they'll like it. And if you don't like it, you don't really engage with it. And so people were very positive about that idea. Let me share this picture and you can like it or not like it. And if people like it, we'll see more things like it. Now you have, because so many people are on it, and because the nature of discourse in our society has changed, you have activists and foreign agents and governments who are all trying to use that communication channel for their own ends. Our perspective was, what was hard is that we were trying to share perspective as a company that was drowned out by the news media. So an important thing to recognize about news media is currently, so my take on a lot of it, there are a lot of well-meaning people in the industry, but it's also founded on the ability to sell advertising. And so the state of discourse has devolved because we're looking to optimize selling advertising and maintaining a targetable audience of like-minded people to be able to optimize our ad performance and audience engagement, then necessarily digging into every aspect of the truth. So there's a lot more opinion than there is about fact giving on every channel, whether it's Fox or CNN or NBC. Because of 24-hour news, we're just giving more opinion because there isn't as many events to talk about. And the motivation is to be able to maintain an audience. Now, I'm not going to say who's right and who's wrong. I'm just saying that it's important to note that. Well, the Facebook side is Facebook is very newsworthy. And during that situation, we did an analysis of news stories, and it was north of 80% of news stories didn't put any of our statements in until at least the 5th paragraph down, which nobody reads. And so we had something like we had between 10 and 100 million of donated of unearned media a week negatively against it, because it was newsworthy. There was things going on, but it was also, it sold ads, and it sold ads well. And so we were in a really hard situation because we agreed with what the average person thought, but we were not able to communicate that effectively because there was so much profit in being as sensational as possible. So I look at that a bit and say, it's important as you're looking at news to think critically, no matter what your news source is, and recognize that it is in their business and financial interest to be as sensational as possible to keep eyeballs so that they can sell ad spots. Anyways, hopefully this was useful. I had a lot of fun talking about these. Any other questions that people come up with? We had some really great questions, and hopefully answering those for useful. They were useful. Give people 2 minutes. The wrap up, I think, in persuasion and in politics right now is, again, I think more people are interested in feeling good than being effective, and we're not taking into account, as we're evaluating sources of information, what some of their motivations are. But to convince people, it's a pretty simple formula, but it's hard to execute. One last question: opinion on the effectiveness of long form communication like podcasts. I think the success of those, I actually personally like listening to Joe Rogan. I think the philosophy is reflective more of what individuals are starting to believe now, which is I think people would like to be informed of the complexity of issues. They're recognizing that we're oversimplifying issues. the real life hard truth is that most people don't have time. And so that's why I can keep soda in schools with a simple paragraph, because the individuals don't have time to think about it. I'd encourage you all to think about ways to be more informed and to encourage others. When I talk to people in focus groups about this kind of thing, they'd love to know more, and they recognize, the individual recognizes that issues are more complex than we think. But in terms of how they consume, there's way too much weight right now, and there's way too much money behind making it simple, fast, and oversimplified. But that can only change by us as individuals starting to find ways to change, to support things like long form communication, to spend money on what we want to do, what we want to see, and to encourage one-on-one communication with people who are not like ourselves, recognizing that our own opinions might change in those interchanges. Anyways, thanks so much. I hope it was useful and interesting. Please feel free, if you have follow-up comments or want to engage one-on-one, reach out to me on LinkedIn or through direct message. I'd love to talk through, or if I can help, especially the students who are looking to know more and grow in their roles. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And I've had a lot of help from people, and so love giving back. So if there's debate, if you disagreed with what I said, feel free to reach out, and love to hear your perspective. So thanks very much.